Imagine an emperor so obsessed with fame that he crossed the sea, forced the schedule of the Olympic Games to change, and then won events he could barely finish. In 66 AD, Emperor Nero stepped into the world's most prestigious athletic festival, not as a sponsor, but as a contestant. And everyone in the stadium already knew the result: beat. Was this a celebration of Roman power, or the most embarrassing performance in Olympic history? By the time Nero thought about competing in Greece, his reputation in Rome was already complicated. On one hand, he was emperor, commander of legions, ruler of a vast empire, and absolute authority in name. On the other, Nero saw himself as something very different: an artist, a singer, and a charioteer who believed he deserved applause more than obedience. He was fascinated with Greek culture. For centuries, Romans had admired Greek art, literature, and philosophy. Nero took that admiration further. He didn't just want to watch Greek performances, he wanted to star in them. In Rome, he staged elaborate shows where he sang, acted, and played instruments in front of carefully chosen audiences. Senators and elites were expected to sit for hours praising his talent, whether they enjoyed it or not. But performing in Rome wasn't enough. If Nero wanted eternal glory, he needed to impress the Greeks themselves, on their own sacred ground. The Olympic Games were not just sporting events. They were religious festivals dedicated to Zeus, with strict rules and a fixed schedule. Ordinary athletes had to qualify, train, and arrive on time. Nero was not an ordinary athlete. When he planned his grand tour of Greece, he wanted all the major festivals, the Olympics in Olympia, the Pythian Games at Delphi, and the Isthmian Games near Corinth, and others, to line up with his visit. So the dates moved. Under normal circumstances, that would have been unthinkable. But when the Roman emperor demanded it, the Greeks complied. Celebrating their powerful patron and keeping his favor was for many city-states more important than protecting the calendar. For Nero, it was simple. If he was going to perform, the entire Greek festival schedule would have to revolve around him. Nero didn't limit himself to a single event. According to ancient sources, he entered multiple competitions: musical contests, singing and playing the lyre, poetry and acting competitions, chariot races, including one with an unusually large team of horses. These were not casual entries. They were staged as showcases of imperial excellence. The problem: Nero was not a world-class athlete. In Greek tradition, Olympic winners were the best of the best. They spent years training their bodies, perfecting their skills, and enduring brutal discipline. Nero, by contrast, had grown up as a pampered aristocrat and ruler, surrounded by tutors and flatterers. But at the games, no one was going to tell him no. Judges, organizers, and even other competitors understood the unspoken rule: the emperor must win. Questioning his victory could be seen not just as rude, but as disloyal or dangerous. One of the most famous episodes comes from Nero's chariot racing. He reportedly entered a race with a 10-horse chariot, far more than the usual 4. It was a dramatic, impressive sight, and almost impossible to control safely. During the race, Nero struggled to handle the team. At some point, he either lost control or fell from the chariot. Accounts differ on the details, but the result is clear: he did not finish the race. By normal Olympic standards, that would mean disqualification. No finish, no victory. Yet, when it was time to announce the winner, Nero was crowned anyway. The judges declared that if he had completed the race, he would have been the greatest, so they awarded him the wreath. In that moment, the Olympic ideal clashed with political reality. The games that were supposed to celebrate athletic merit instead showcased how far people would go to flatter an emperor. Nero didn't just want victory, he wanted applause. When he performed music or recited on stage, audiences were expected to react with enthusiasm. Clapping, cheering, and shouting praise became a kind of ritual. Some spectators reportedly fainted, not from excitement, but from being forced to stay for hours and hours, through repeated performances. Others slipped out only when they could safely leave without being noticed. In Rome, elites knew their careers, and sometimes their lives, depended on how they responded to the emperor's talent. In Greece, judges and organizers knew that their cities relied on Roman goodwill, tax breaks, and favors. Cheering Nero wasn't about taste, it was about survival. When Nero finally left Greece, he did not return quietly. He brought back a huge collection of crowns and titles from the festivals he had won. According to his official narrative, he wasn't just Emperor of Rome, he was a champion in the greatest Greek contests. As part of this tour, Nero also made a dramatic political move. He declared the freedom of the Greeks. In practice, it meant certain cities received tax reductions in symbolic recognition of their status. For some Greeks, this was a moment of real relief and gratitude. For others, it was overshadowed by the memory of forced victories and staged competitions. Nero wanted to be remembered as a liberator and a cultural hero. Whether people honestly saw him that way depended very much on where they stood, and how much they depended on Roman favor. Nero's reign ended violently in 68 AD. After his death, the Roman Senate declared him a public enemy. A new ruling dynasty came to power, and with it came a wave of cleanup. One of the easiest things to reverse was his record. Those victories in Greece? Many of them were erased or quietly ignored. The new regime had no interest in preserving the memory of an emperor who forced judges to reward performances he didn't earn. For later Roman writers, Nero's behavior at the games became a symbol, not a strength, but of excess, vanity, and the corruption of power. Yet, it's worth remembering that not everything was pure comedy. Behind the absurdity of a non-finishing charioteer crowned as champion were real people. Greek judges torn between tradition and survival, athletes sidelined by politics, and cities trying to stay on the good side of Rome. Nero's Olympic story sits at an uncomfortable crossroads between sport, politics, and ego. On paper, he was a multiple-time festival winner, a crowned champion in the sacred games of Greece. In reality, his victories depended less on talent and more on fear. The Olympics were supposed to honor the strongest, the fastest, and the most skilled. Nero showed what happens when someone with absolute power walks into that arena and refuses to lose. So, when you picture the ancient Olympics, don't just imagine the perfect athletes and noble contests. Remember the emperor who crashed his chariot and still walked away wearing the winner's crown.